Hi, welcome to this second video on how I produce my artwork. The first video was very much an introduction, and the second one is just going to cover three of the tools that I use in a little bit more detail. Just to recap, I'm Dave Sutton. I was asked to produce a video by a few members of the art club that I attend, which is the Ainsdale and Birkdale Art Club. So I'm just doing a quick introduction to some of the tools I use. I've actually just counted now, I've got about 12 tools that I actually use, so 12 applications that I can use at any one time. If I'm producing a piece of art, then I think the most I've used of those tools at any one time is 8, because they tend to run on different devices. So some on an iPad, some on my laptop, and others on this large desktop that I'm using at the moment. For this demonstration, I'm only going to show 3 of those tools, and these are probably the 3 most common ones I use. Typically I might use 5, possibly 6, so it's very limited demonstration. Within the introduction, I actually went through what we're going to produce and how we're going to do it. What I'm going to do now is just recap very quickly on the introduction. So basically what we're going to be doing in this demo is to produce this image here. I've chosen this because it's a fairly straightforward thing to do, and I can do it with just using 3 tools, and it gives you quite a good impression of how some of the artwork is produced. So what we have here is a final image. To get to the image, we start off by creating a fractal image. And to do that, we're going to be looking at a fractal generator. We take the fractal image and we overlay it with a further fractal image, again created by the fractal generator. We move the whole thing into Adobe Photoshop Elements, where we do some editing and some cleaning up. We then want to alter the style of the image, so we're looking now for an image which we can use as a style guide, and I've chosen this one here, which is an image again created by the Fractal generator quite some time ago, and I'm purely going to use that to provide a different style for the image that we've started with. And we feed all those 2 images into artificial intelligence, and it produces this final product. So what I'm going to be doing now is to go through the tools in a little bit more detail. Now, it's a little bit more difficult than normal. I've normally got one computer but 2 large screens. At the moment, for this demonstration, in order to capture the information, I'm only using one screen, so I need to pull things up and down and remember the sequence we did things. So let's have a look now. Yeah. So this is the fractal generator. There's little bits of it chopped off, but you probably got enough there to see more or less what's going on. When you first start off using the generator, it will actually give you a couple of specimen images that you can use. Some of them tend to be good, others tend to be totally unusable, so it's a matter of looking around and finding one that looks appropriate. Once you do that, you can then start to modify it, and there's a tremendous amount of things that you can do in order to modify the image. And as you can see, 2 triangles there. What I can do with the triangles is I can move the triangles to anywhere over the image. I can spin them around and rotate them, and I can alter the size of them, and there's only 2 there. When I do that, it's actually altering the algorithms, the mathematics behind this, which makes it work, and those are the algorithms there. And further down here you can see some of the things that can be modified. I said that they're a little bit missing off the screen, so there's further things you can see on the side here. And there's only 2 algorithms for this individual fractal image, and you can see there's not much there, but you can actually move these things around. I'm not sure it's going to do much on here because there's much. Yeah, we see the image changing now. Yeah, I can actually rotate it and rotate it. We see it changing a bit. Okay, to fine tune the types of movements and alterations I can do, I can play around with the things on here. Before going to the images I'm using, which I've actually done in advance, there's a lot of other things you can do. So over here, this is a camera, so it's a 3D camera. There's a little bit missing off here, but basically this thing called a roll, a pitch, and a bank. So it's as though the camera is is in space and it's looking down on the image, so we can actually rotate around the image and look at it in different perspectives. And it's when we get the perspective right, that's the image that we're going to pick after we've done lots and lots of modifications to it. Another key thing that you might want to look at, and people ask me about, is where does all the colour come from, and how do I choose which colours to use on an image? Well, there's actually a gradient map here. So there's a map here of the colours that are being used at the time, but also we can change those. So we can look down here and there's lots of different image patterns, so I can change the images. So if this was a multicoloured image, and some of them are, then we can start to use the different palettes here. So there's a lot of different palettes we can use, a phenomenal amount of modifications that we can do on the image itself. We can decide on the scale of the image, so we can change the scales, and that's just altered the scale on the screen. We can change the quality. The images that you look at and you modify tend to be in fairly low quality, and that's really because it takes a lot of power to actually do the modifications. But we can change that. We can actually do things what we call in real time, but it means it's a lot slower to do the manipulations. But when we come to save it, then we click on it and say render, and it renders an image. So I think the main thing to get from this is that it's not that intuitive. It's something that you need to use for quite a long time, and to gain an impression of which images you want to use and how you're going to use them, and then understand which elements of variables and things that you can change are worth changing, which don't. So it is quite a long learning curve. Another key factor here is there's a thing called layers. So we've just got one layer here, and that layer has a density and a weight to it. What we can do is superimpose more and more layers onto this to change it. So we take a fractal image, we'll modify it, we'll get it looking in a reasonable condition, but we've always got in the back of our mind that we might be using 3 or 4 images. And we can then start to layer on top of this different images, and we can change the density and the weight of each one, so the amount of transparency changes. So this is basically unusable, this thing, because there's very little there. I preloaded one that I was actually working on before. Let's see if we can find it. And I think it's this one, and you can see the image there. That's probably an earlier one. It's probably this one. What to start with? So let's have a look. Okay, so that's the image that we started off looking at and saying this is the starting position for our final image. So basically, I've been doing a lot of manipulation in order to come to this image, which to me looks something that's usable. Now the definition, as I said, isn't that good, but when we render it, it'll make it a lot better. If we look here now, so it's difficult to see all the triangles. Sometimes they're hidden. But each one of these algorithms that's being used to generate the picture corresponds to a triangle. So for example, if I show that we can see the red one, if I click on the red one, it highlights, no, if it clicks on the yellow, if it clicks on the red, it'll highlight the red triangle there, and we can do fine-grained manipulations here of the actual algorithm. So it's like variables in a mathematical algorithm that can change, or we can change them on the screen by moving the triangles around, say rotating them or changing the size. So we can do an awful lot of manipulation on that individual image to get it right, and that's what I've done to create what I think is a reasonable starting point. Let's put the camera back, and I said we can look at this from all different directions now. I won't do this, I'm going to fly over things. So the next thing I did, I loaded another image on top of it. I won't do that now, because I've already pre-done it, so I've saved it away, so I can come into this and just reload that now. Let's have a look. Okay. So now we've actually got the 2 images superimposed on top of each other. If we want to actually see them, what we can do, let me you can look at the layers, and the layer that we're looking at now is that one there. That's the new one. And if we want to look at the old one, that's the old one there. We still get the same image. If we actually want to look at it, but only look at the image that we're working on at the time, then we can hide all others. Yeah. So that's the original one we started with. Let's show them both. Look at this one. Hide all others. And we can now see the image that was being superimposed. And again, a lot of work went into getting this image right. And all the time that you're doing it, you've got in the back of your mind that you're going to superimpose it on something else. And I say a number of times what I'll be doing is maybe having 3 or 4 images superimposed. So as you need to be generating a mental map of what this is going to look like when it's being completed. You don't really need to start at the very beginning understanding what you're going to achieve at the end, but you do have to be looking at 3 or 4 different steps ahead to say, is this going to generate something that's useful? So what we've got now, if I show them all, is a picture which is reasonable for putting into Adobe Photoshop and doing some modifications on. So that's our fractal image. And say this is a fairly simple example of creating a fractal image. Okay, so what I've done now, I've taken that fractal image and rendered it, and then loaded it into Adobe Photoshop. Now there's a couple of things there that for this example I want to show. The first thing is that there's a couple of lines down here that I want to get rid of, and typically I'd get rid of those by using this tool. This is a tool there, which is a clone stamp, and I'd be copying parts of the image and overwriting this. That's probably the simplest way to do it. There's lots of other ways of doing it. There's a thing called let's have a look down here, a smudge tool. So what I could do if we wanted to is smudge that blue colour over the orange line, so I could smudge it over. I use smudge a lot actually. I use it if I've been integrating images so that the edges are nice and undefined, I'd say. So if it's a bit raggedy edge and I want to smooth it all out so that it's not as clear as it was before but looks more realistic, then I tend to smudge it out. So that's a key thing I use smudging for. I also tend to smudge things together to just make them look better, more natural. So it's quite a common tool I use. I'd say that the other thing I tend to use quite a lot of, which is a tool that you'd use for digital art, which you probably wouldn't use for photography. So Photoshop Elements is very often used for photographs, or modifying photographs. But when you're doing digital art, you tend to use a completely different set of tools on it. So I use a thing called Transform a lot, and Warp. Yeah, so you can see there that what I've got now, I've got an image and I can warp it into whatever I like. I mean, you can do quite a lot with this actually. Just this little tool. There's lots and lots of tools. I can just warp it around. I won't do that now. So that gives an impression of some of the things I can do. There's a whole host of things that I can do. The other thing I can do is I can take various parts of this and modify the colours. And I said we were talking earlier on about how I use the colours when we looked at the different palettes that are used when we're doing the fractals. Over and above that, I tend to get something which is reasonable within the fractal generator, move it into Photoshop, and then modify all of the colours again. And there's quite a few different things you can do with this. So, for example, I can go into here and see there's lots of different things on there, but probably the most common thing I use is the colour and the sort of hue and saturation. So I can look at the colours and I can modify them. So I've got hue, saturation, and lightness. Colours there's 2 ways of looking at colours. There's hue, saturation, and lightness, but there's also the primary colours, which are red, green, and blue. So the human eyes basically see 3 bands of colour, red, green, and blue, and those colours are the same colours that are used on computer screens. So that's why everything always works on red, green, and blue. And we tend to mix them. So the amount of each colour gives you all the other colours that are in between. Computers can see in a lot more colours. So, for example, the satellites in space can see 13 different colour ranges Where say humans generally see 3, some people can only see 2, and some people can see 4, but the vast majority of us can only see 3 colour bands. And that's why when you start to use colours on a lot of applications on digital art, you'll be working in those three primary colour bands, which are different from the primary colours that you do when you're mixing art colours. So we can modify the colours like this. Yeah, we can change things. But also what I can do, I can just take one small element, maybe draw a circle around it or sketch around it and then change the colours. So I can change the colours of everything, or I can look at individual colours and change them. So if there's too much green or I don't like the green, I can modify it to look differently in the particular portion I'm looking at. Just cancel that. Another thing I tend to use quite a lot of is there's lots of adjustments you can make. And there's also lots of artistic brushes we can use and different things we can do and blur in it. And I use those from time to time. But typically I would use the distort, so I can distort things. So for example, I can pinch something, so I can draw a circle around something and pinch it to make it go to pinch inwards. And then the reverse of the pinch is the spherize. You can actually, if you look at spherize there, I can do 100 degree, so 100%, I can move down, and you can with all the other tools as well. But when I move it into pinch, it's a different shape. So therefore, you might use this on some occasions, and you might use the pinch on others. And there's a lot more things you can do, and I tend to use these quite extensively when I do modifications. So on this particular one, what I've wanted to do there was pinch this circle inwards, and then make a dome shape here, and then change the colour there to red. So not too many things, and tidy all this up. So tidy all that up there. So it's quite simple. If I look to see what it looks like when I finished it, okay, we can see that. Oh, the other thing, I've turned it around as well. So I've turned the picture around. You can see that the centre there, I've just pinched it inwards. I've made a dome in the centre. I've changed that to red, and I've cleared up all the lines there. So nothing too major. That on some of the images I've got, I actually do quite major reconstructions of the image using Photoshop. So you can actually make it look completely differently. So for example, on some of the artwork that I've got vases. Well, this is how I create a vase. So what I might be doing on here is using a tool to cut out a section of it in the shape of a vase, and then modifying it. Right. So what I haven't done is taken a photograph of a vase and then, digitally manipulated it. I create the vase from scratch, and I create everything from scratch. So the position we are now is we've now got an image which is quite reasonable as one of my images. And certainly, if I was going to create a vase with a what looks like a shape of a flower on it, then what I might be doing is adding a top section to this, so maybe replicating it, or even doing 4, cutting it out and making it into the shape of a vase. I could do the whole thing on here. What we're doing for this example, we're going to actually change the style of it. So I'm looking at this and thinking, oh, there's a couple of things I might want to change. So I've got all the area around the outside, and again, purely as an example, I just want to change the style of that and get it to look different to what it looks now. The other thing we want to do is maybe change this area here, which is a bit blank and a bit dark. So maybe change some of the style around there. So when I feed this into artificial intelligence, what it's doing, it's looking at the style of one picture and superimposing that style into the other one. What it's not doing is merging the things together. And once I've done that, very often I find that the image I've created isn't as good as I would hope. So what I do, I put it back into Adobe Photoshop as a separate layer. So I'll keep this here, I'll recreate it as a separate layer, and then merge the 2 layers together. I'll just show you what I mean by a layer. So I can take this picture, previous one, and put it there, and we'll notice now that we've got 2 layers on the right hand side. You can see on the right hand side here I've got 2 layers. Yeah. On the top layer I can maybe change its transparency, and if you see now the 2 layers are merging, I can play around doing that, and it's something that I do from time to time. So I'll just get rid of that now. Okay, so we'll just go back to this again. So that's where we are. We've finished this part of the use of Adobe Photoshop Elements, and we're now going to use artificial intelligence to change the style. If I go back to, if I can remember, let's go back to one of these images, just as a recap. Where were we now? Okay. Just to recap, this is the image that I'm going to use when we go into artificial intelligence. So I said I wanted to restyle this image, which is the one we've been looking at in Adobe Photoshop, and that's the modified image. And then I'm taking this image here and using that as a style. So if you think about what a style is, it's not a picture that's going to be merged, as I said. It's the style that a computer would see when it's trying to understand what's in an image. So for example, if we have a world art gallery, so a gallery of all the top artwork in the world, which there is, which Google have created, and they've classified using quite a lot of different classification groups, all of the artwork. And the way you do that is you feed it into artificial intelligence. It looks for certain aspects within the picture, and then it uses that as a classification. If you use your own classifications, your own styles, which I'm giving it now, it'll look for something in here, and it's what the computer sees in there in order to classify it. And then it'll look for similar things in the original photograph and amplify them. So basically what it's going to amplify, looking at this, is there's a lot of detail here, and you can see that's, you can see that being part of a style. So what it'll do is look for that, or something slightly resembling it in the other photograph, and then amplify it out. It might look for some of these blobs here and amplify those, and maybe some of these red shapes. And again, it'd be looking for something similar in the other photograph and then amplifying it. So if we go to this, we can see that maybe around here we'll start to get some blobs coming out, and around the outside we'll see it being modified. So just to show you, and you can see it there, you can see those blobs coming out there. It's filled in some of the dark parts that I wanted to get rid of, and it's changed this outside here and modified it. And what it's done that's nice, it's left a lot of this in place which I wanted to keep, and some of these aspects I said before I wanted to keep. So it's kept the areas I wanted to keep, and it's modified the others. The only way I've managed to get it to do that is because you really have got no discretion over what it does. You can only try to estimate what the computer is going to see and how it's going to modify something, which takes quite a lot of experience, I suppose. So it's just quite a large learning curve, that. So we'll jump into that now and we'll see how it's done. Okay, so this is Deep Dream Generator, which I use. Now, the thing about this is some very good artists use it, and you use it to modify pictures, and it can be quite sophisticated. The issue with it is there are a number of different options for purchasing it. So it's quite expensive to buy. I think you pay so much a month, or you can have a free version. I use the free version, which means that the quality of the things that I'm doing is very poor indeed. And the number of times that I can attempt to generate something are very limited. So usually what you would do, you'd have two pictures, use one as a style, one as the picture, and say modify, tries to modify it, you don't like it, so you keep changing the style till you get it right. You'll either pick a totally different style, or you go back into your creation tools and regenerate the style and keep creating it, and do this continuously. The problem that I've got with the free one is that I've got a power of 20, which means that I've only got 4 chances within quite a few hours. It's a long time before you can use it again. So every time I do a generation, it uses 5 points, 5 power points. So I've only got 4 chances. So I need to be very careful that the style I'm using is going to give the right results. And then when I've got a picture, the next thing you'll see is the quality is pretty poor. So I've then somehow got to improve the quality of it. Yeah. If I decided to buy this professional version, then I need to spend a lot more money, and I'd need to use it a lot more frequently than I do. So let's try and have a look at the generator and just show you what it does. So the way you generate things, you choose the base image. So you choose the first image, which would be my flower shape. Choose a style image, which would be the other style that you saw, and then just press generate, and basically that's all you do. Now there are some settings that you can make, and I quite often use these. So you can change the weight of the style and how many iterations it's going to do, means how many times it's going to go around. And not much else. Now the problem with doing this is, especially for me, is that the amount of power it uses varies depending if you're changing these or not. So if you don't work on the standard and just leave these as is, then rather than using 5, it can use 8 or 10, which means that I've got less chances then. So unless I get it more or less right first time, I'm going to have to wait till the following day before I have another go at it. So it's not that useful unless you're pretty experienced with it. Now I've been using this quite some time, so I've got a good idea of what the images are going to look like when I've finished them. So I'll just show you now. So if I look at this one, which is the one we've done, so this is the final image, and that really is the size and the quality of it. You can see that it's fairly small and the quality isn't actually brilliant. You can look at the image that went in. So that's the image that went in from Adobe Photoshop Elements, and that's the other image which I put in there, which was the used for the style. So that's the original image and that's the style. And it really is as straightforward as that. So as a tool, it's incredibly simple to use. To use it effectively is quite difficult. And you're either very lucky you'll get something to work, or you've got to spend a lot of time trying to have a good understanding of what's going to be generated, unless you want to pay for the professional version, which I don't at the moment. Okay. And if we go back now, let's have a quick look. So where we were. Okay, so we're really back to the beginning now of the picture we wanted to get to. So the image you saw there, I put back into Adobe Photoshop Elements. I've done some minor, incredibly minor modifications to it in order to maybe enhance it a little bit. I've changed the size and the scale of it, and we've come up with this image, which usually for something like a piece of art is fine. If you want to try and use it as some of the pictures you actually saw earlier on use it, especially for modifying photographs, then it just isn't really the quality at all that you'd want. Certainly if you are going to try to use it to do some artistic modifications based on photographs or fine artwork, then you really are going to have to buy the professional version, because the quality is just far superior. But for the work I do, I don't really need that at all. So I produced this image. What I would tend to do is create a lot of images, and this is blown up so it looks quite large. So I'd then condense that right down so it's a very small image, and then use lots of the small images and put all those together to generate some art. So the level of quality of the image isn't too important. And I find the same thing again if I'm trying to produce something as a very large canvas. I don't find that the image quality is a problem. Once I've put it back into Photoshop, I've overlaid it onto original image and I've done some modifications, it's usually fine. Just a quick mention of quality when you're dealing with the fractal images. It's very strange when you're dealing with fractals, because what you can actually do, you can zoom in and zoom out by a tremendous amount and you don't lose any definition whatsoever. So whereas if you have a photograph or any sort of picture that you have on a computer screen, if you bring it right down to a very small image and generate it as that small image, and then you try to blow it up, then you find you get a complete loss of definition. You don't get any loss of definition at all when you're dealing with fractals. So it's quite a useful thing to know. And that really is the end of this. Well, it's a fairly short demo. I know it's been running for some time now. I've been 30 minutes doing it, but a relatively small introduction into some of the tools I use, and probably the most common tools I use. I've got similar tools on the iPad. They're a little bit more difficult to use. They aren't as sophisticated, but you can get some very nice results of it. It's probably worth mentioning that Photoshop Elements is far cheaper than using Photoshop. Everything else I use is more or less free, or I'm using something for a couple of pounds I might be paying. But I don't pay much at all because I want to use things that anybody can use without having to go to any expense. So if anybody's still with me, thank you very much indeed for watching this video.